Welcome to the Arvada City Council study session, January 13th on short-term rentals. Pleasure to have you all here. All of council is present and accounted for. Ms. Morris, who has this item to introduce?
I believe Ms. Garner is going to kick us off.
Ms. Garner, good to see you.
Thank you so much, Mayor, members of the council. We have been in front of the council, the former council, to talk about short-term rentals. Most recently, it was last February. We had some good discussion. We've heard a lot of good feedback, helpful feedback about where some of the concerns were. Then, we had an incident that happened last year. And so it's given us a lot of opportunity to really think about how can we really kind of focus on the biggest concerns that our community has around short-term rentals while still facilitating the use of them within the city. So we have a lot of ideas that we want to broach with you tonight. Primarily, it's really focused on 3 fundamental changes to our existing code. And Nora is going to talk in great detail about each one of those changes. And then following this discussion, we're really here to share information. We did do a survey. We have that survey information. I believe I shared the full survey results with you. But we are going to talk a little bit about some of that feedback tonight. And then immediately following that, Josie Sook and I are going to do a little demonstration about the Granicus website, which is our third-party vendor that's helping us with day-to-day ongoing customer concerns that they may have around short-term rentals. So thank you for your time tonight. We really appreciate it. And just to kick us off, first slide. Oh. And there we're done.
Short.
Record.
Short.
Wow.
The record.
Yes, I'm really good at that. The one thing I will ask is if council can hold all of your questions until we get through to the very end. We have plenty of time for a Q&A, but if you have anything, just write it down and we will definitely get back to you. So just to, oh no, please go back.
Oh, it's working now. Sorry.
Oh, so just
exciting.
Yeah. Just for lay of the land, so everybody knows where we are right now with short-term rentals in the city. We have 389 active licenses that we have issued to folks. It's pretty consistent with what we have had over the past 5 years. So not a lot of change. Of those, and this will become important in our conversation later as we talk a little bit about this, 21 of those licenses have 2 licenses, and 4 of those, like extra licensees, have 3 licenses. So just to remind you, right now our current ordinance allows up to 3 licenses. They can be issued to an LLC, and I know that that's a primary component of what we're going to be discussing tonight. But just to give you some context, that's really where we are right now. And in our overall examination of what's going on and what we don't have licensed, and this is through the work of Granicus, we have about 235 that we discovered that do not have licenses currently. Some of them may have business licenses. They didn't go out and actually get a short-term rental license. So we're clarifying that right now. This is the number that we have. Josie and her team are going to be issuing letters to all of those folks over the next basically 3 to 4 weeks so that we have a little bit of time to process those and get them all on board. So that's just really where we are right now. I'm going to turn it over at this point to Nora so she can talk a little bit about our current ordinance.
Thanks, Jessica. So STRs are relatively new in terms of being offered on online platforms. I think they've been around for maybe 20 or 25 years. Every city in Colorado that regulates STRs takes a different approach to regulating them. Anytime you regulate a relatively new endeavor, there's a learning curve involved in this, especially when you're regulating an area or an endeavor that is somewhat complicated. So over time, you learn what works in terms of regulation and you learn what doesn't work so well. You have to take time and take into account and try to balance what makes sense for the community and determine how many resources it takes to regulate the activity, among other things. So it takes time to find the right balance whenever you're regulating a relatively new endeavor. Our STR ordinance dates from 2020. It's been revised in its entirety 2 times since then, and events over the past year suggest that perhaps we have not yet found the exact right balance in terms of determining what works for our community as a whole. So that's why we're here today. So this slide illustrates some of the features of our current ordinance. And we'll talk about the license provisions first, and keep in mind that the whole licensing piece or licensure is different than ownership of STRs. So keep that in mind. So our current ordinance, not surprisingly, requires that people get a license. The licenses are for 1 year, and each licensee can operate up to 3 different STRs. So currently, an STR can be owned by any person or any entity, a corporation, STR, partnership, individual, spouses, really can be any type of ownership. This creates some confusion, and I think Josie and some other folks from CED might talk about that a little bit later. Another point that's not on the slide, but you should be aware of it, is the current ordinance allows property inspections to be done when a license is applied for, or when there's a renewal license applied for, or for compliance reasons. So we already have that authority to do that. And then some of the features of the current ordinance that you should be aware of is it, in terms of enforcement, there are what we perceive to be a couple of enforcement gaps. The current ordinance refers to some unlawful acts, and it actually mentions a few unlawful acts, but we feel like the unlawful acts could be set forth in a more transparent or clear way. If we do that, that would assist STR owners, STR guests, neighbors, and even our own enforcement and administrative people in better understanding what is unlawful relating to STR operations. So in addition, the current ordinance doesn't really clarify roles and responsibilities around enforcement processes. And then finally, the current ordinance doesn't contain any different definitions, which are often helpful in the administration and enforcement of an ordinance. It doesn't contain a detailed statement outlining the CED director's authority and what powers the CED director has. And it doesn't provide a lot of guidance to the municipal court in how to handle STR cases either. So our bottom line in looking at the current ordinance is figuring out how to best achieve the balance in regulating STRs. We think we can achieve a better balance by revising the current ordinance, and we'll discuss proposed changes in just a few minutes. So remember, this is a legislative drafting project. We're looking for progress toward our goals, not perfection. We should ask ourselves, how can we revise the ordinance to strike a better balance for everyone's needs? And so the next thing we're going to look at on the next slide is about some of the issues that have arisen under the current ordinance. So some of the problems, and some of you who have been on council for a while are aware of this. We've had problems around the administration of our ordinance. A lot of these problems revolve around the fact that a single corporate entity can have up to 3 licenses with different emergency contacts. And I think if you have any questions on that, I think Josie can talk more about that. In terms of enforcement issues, City Council is aware of these issues. We've had discussions about these before. Resolving enforcement issues is more difficult under our current ordinance, we think, because roles and responsibilities are not clearly spelled out, and the provisions around unlawful acts are not as clear as they otherwise could be. And then we've had a number of complaints about STRs over the years. Candace will be talking more about that in just a few minutes. The process for handling complaints could be spelled out a little bit better in our current ordinance. And so we're looking at making some changes to our complaint process too. And I think the Granicus software program that CED is championing and will be talking with us about here shortly will help us with that as well. So we believe our current ordinance is out of balance just slightly, and we think that revisions to it can help bring it back into balance. City Council has discussed some of these concerns most recently in 2025. Essentially, what I took away from the council conversations around this is whether the current ordinance represents the best balance, taking into account the needs or concerns of STR guests, STR neighbors, STR owners, as well as city team members. And so the questions that you were asking essentially is, does our city team have the right tools to properly administer and enforce the ordinance and do it in a way that protects the public's health, safety, and welfare? So City Council asked us to look for solutions to help ensure that that STRs are more effectively integrated into our neighborhood. They ask us to help strengthen accountability processes and provisions in our code, and to bring back a proposal that helps improve the ordinance and how we process can handle STRs. So that's why we're here today. Most of the changes, as we have perhaps alluded to, relate to the minimum number of licenses held by a person, and then some changes around the enforcement piece of the ordinance. So now I'm going to turn it over to Candace, and she's going to focus on some other data points around STRs, including information about STR complaints.
Thanks, Nora. So with this next slide, we have a snapshot of what we've seen in Arvada over the past year. In 2025, this is a breakdown of complaints by category. We average about 7 submissions per month through Arvada, which are most comparable to what we see with graffiti on public property, homeless camps, sewer and stormwater, and trash and recycling specifically through Arvada. And while these are all the complaints that we capture by code, city manager's office, and planning, this data does not include direct calls made to our police department, which is significantly higher at about 325, 350, which our police officers, our PD team is here to be able to answer that and provide more context of what that looks like, what those calls come in with, but we see more nuisance complaints. So what we see here generally mirrors what our PD department is also seeing. So again, they can provide more context on that at the end. But yeah, that one.
Okay, so now we'll move to the proposed ordinance. This is just a real high-level review of what we are proposing. A lot of what we have put into a draft ordinance is based around the concerns that council voiced to us last year about the number of STR licenses that any one person can hold and whether the proper administrative and enforcement tools are in place. So based on that feedback, we are proposing a couple of things. First, that we revise the STR ordinance, and then also that we create program rules around STRs so that we can provide more guidance for staff and STR owners, neighbors, and guests about how our licenses are handled and how enforcement is handled. So looking at the main features of the proposed ordinance in terms of this business of licenses and ownership. Again, keep in mind, licensing is different than ownership. With one exception, we're not making any changes to how STRs can be held. So in terms of licenses, the first feature that we want to talk about in the proposed ordinance is that licenses have to be issued to a real person. So again, that's different than ownership. Under the proposed ordinance, any entity can still hold the ownership of an STR. So that could be a corporation, it could be an LLC, it could be a partnership, it could be an individual, it could be spouses. We're not messing with the ownership, with the one exception is we want licenses to be issued to a real person that has a minimum ownership interest in whatever entity owns that STR. So it could be an individual ownership or spouses that own it. It could be an LLC, but the person who is applying for the STR license would have to have a minimum ownership interest in that LLC. So that's the piece about real people being licensees. We think this is a middle ground between the extremes of, for example, allowing owner-occupied STRs, or on the other hand, allowing any corporation or company or LLC to hold licenses. Requiring each licensee to be a real person does several things. It assures the community that a real person is responsible for keeping that STR up in compliance with the law. It enhances communication between STR owners and neighbors and the city, and it creates a clear point of contact and helps enhance accountability. So we think this will help close some of the enforcement gaps, which again is in alignment with the direction that we got from council last year. The second thing I'll mention about licenses is we propose to reduce the number of licenses that each licensee can hold. So currently they can hold licenses for 3 different STR units, and we are proposing that number be stepped down to 1 over a period of years. We think that doing this, well, first of all, as Candace will talk about in a few minutes, this brings us more into alignment with how other Colorado cities regulate STRs. We also think, and as was mentioned earlier, this change is not going to impact that many STR owners, although it will have an impact on some. And those numbers were on that first slide where we think we know approximately 4 licensees hold 3 STR licenses and another 21 hold 2. Those folks would step down to holding 1 license over a period of years. This would allow STR owners time to adjust to the new law, and it would, we think, prevent unnecessary destabilization in the STR market right now. This change also addresses City Council's concern about ineffective enforcement. And then a couple of provisions in the new ordinance about enforcement gaps. We've seen how enforcement gaps can create real negative impacts in our neighborhoods. So partly we think this might be because STR activity has outpaced the city's oversight and enforcement capabilities. And so this ordinance helps address those gaps. We address these gaps in 2 ways. First, by clarifying existing administrative provisions or creating more efficient administrative provisions. So we give more detail about when licenses can be granted or suspended or revoked or that kind of thing, which the current ordinance doesn't contain a lot of detailed information in that area. This will help STR owners understand what their obligations are and what the process consists of. And then the second thing that we do in terms of enforcement gaps is we more clearly state what the unlawful acts are. As I mentioned earlier, the current ordinance mentions a few unlawful acts, but the proposed ordinance will list quite a few more unlawful acts, the ones that are most common to STR owners. We think this will help STR owners have a better understanding of what their responsibilities are under the law. It'll also help STR guests and neighbors understand what STR owners' obligations are. We mentioned a little bit earlier about inspections. The ordinance will still require, I shouldn't say require inspections, but it will allow for inspections before somebody gets a license, when they request a renewal, or for compliance reasons. And the change we're making to inspections is that we are allowing the CED director the authority to allow a third-party licensed or certified inspector to do those inspections for us. And they would just turn in the forms or the paperwork necessary. But we think that will increase public safety and reduce some neighborhood concerns about STRs. One other thing that we do is we create or propose that we state minimum fines in the ordinance. Right now, the maximum penalties are already set through the other provisions of the code. We're not changing that. All we're saying is we're giving some clarity around minimum fines that might be assessed through if someone is actually charged with a criminal violation in the criminal court or municipal court. That's the only part of this that affects. So when combined with the city's new monitoring software program through Granicus, we think the city is going to be much better positioned to detect and respond to STR issues. So once again, these changes address the city council's concerns that were expressed last year. As part of the city team's work in preparing the proposed ordinance, Candace surveyed some other cities about their STR ordinances, so we want to turn to that information.
Jesse, do you want to hit the minimize button on the video? To the left, the line. There we go. Then you can get that out of the way. Perfect. Thank you.
So as Nora mentioned, we had the opportunity to connect with a handful of our neighboring municipalities, better understand their ordinances with the focus on the primary buckets that Nora was referring to. So the maximum number of licenses per person, LLC ownership and licensure, and enforcement. As you can see, every community has a unique way of addressing short-term rentals. There's no right answer, but we're in good company with our timing and proposed changes. Lakewood, Inglewood, and Westminster made changes in 2023. Fort Collins in 2025, and Boulder anticipate the ongoing changes with the Sundance Festival coming up in the next year ahead. So looking at the table here, we are an outlier with the number of licenses we currently allow with 3, and many of our neighbors only allow for STRs to be in primary residences. So that's also where we allow 3 and they can be primary or non-primary. Regarding the LLC issue, while majority of cities allow an LLC to own an STR and apply for a permit, they must prove ownership and provide identifiable documentation so that an individual can be held accountable, which also aligns with what we are proposing in the new ordinance. And then lastly, a majority of the cities we surveyed can impose fines for loss of license. So yeah, so that's the information here. You can see it's all across the board, but happy to answer further questions on that at the end. But next we'll turn it over to Jesse to talk through our public participation survey.
Yeah, so as part of our info gathering, my name's Jessie. I am the communications manager for CED. So I've met some of you, but it's nice to meet the rest of you. As part of our info gathering for tonight, we conducted a survey of Arvadans aimed at figuring out what public sentiment was around these proposed changes. We provided a high-level description of what could change and then asked participants whether they supported it. After reaching out directly to STR owners and folks who have submitted complaints about STRs to Ask Arvada and doing some broad outreach on social media, we received more than 800 responses. 242 of them came from STR owners or self-identified STR owners and 564 from non-STR owners. And that's a significant response we want to point out from people who actually really care about this issue. So that's a good response from the community. We should share the more detailed results with you in last week's Friday memo, but we wanted to give you some key takeaways so you know what kinds of comments that you might receive from residents. So, two slides. So each question we asked dealt with a different aspect of the changes that Nora spoke to. Question 1 asked whether participants were in favor of only real people and not LLCs being licensed. Overall, respondents were not supportive of this change. STR owners were less supportive than non-STR owners. And as you'll see later on in the comments, there may be a need for clarity and education on this piece. Participants were confused in the question about whether we meant ownership or licensure. Yeah. Question 2 was the one about reducing the number of licenses to 1 per person. Overall, respondents were also not supportive of this change, with STR owners being strongly opposed. And question 3 finally was about the enforcement piece, and overall, most people were supportive of that change. And then lastly, wanted to talk through the open-ended comments. We asked people generally what their thoughts were on the proposed changes. We got 271 responses. Theming them out a little bit, STR owners, some of the main themes were they supported strong enforcement and accountability. They're generally not supportive of limiting the number of licenses and preventing LLCs from being licensed. They expressed wanting more data behind the changes we're considering. And they expressed concerns about losing a source of income that allows them to live in Arvada if they were limited to 1 STR license. And the themes that we heard among the non-STR owners, or those were people who had identified as having lived near an STR or having stayed in one, were they were generally supportive of enforcement and accountability and limiting the number of licenses. They were less favorable when it came to preventing LLCs from being licensed. They expressed concerns about quality of life impact of living near STRs and the impact that they have on the availability of housing. But then they also recognized the economic benefit of having STRs in the city. So really quickly, where the LLC issue is concerned, we think the opposition to this may have been due to how the question was worded, since there is some nuance in the difference between LLC ownership and licensure. So moving forward, this could be an opportunity for us to do some education with our communications about exactly what is or is not changing. And I'll send it back to Nora to wrap us up.
Just as a point of clarity, in case there is a question about affordability and are we taking away opportunities for homeowners? I just want to remind the council, we have about 51,000 housing units in the city, and we're talking about 600 short-term rentals. So in terms of proportionality, I would say we could do a nexus study, but back of the napkin, we're not having an impact. So
Not yet,
not yet.
So
If
today,
it were
you're
widely,
right.
yeah.
but in some communities, a big chunk, a corporation came in and bought a whole block.
Mhm.
So
If
be
it were,
careful with that statement.
Administration's gonna prevent that.
well, that is the
But yeah,
reality of
Yeah, but
today of
that we
where
need
we
to be
are.
clear in our ordinance that you're right, it's not a problem today, it's a small percentage. But I also know in our more lower income or affordable areas, they're buying them up. And that is taking stock away from people that could have them. And so,
We have a provision in the ordinance that could address that. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But however, if that does wind up becoming a perception that that's happening, then we can always conduct a next study where we actually get somebody to tell us exactly how this is having an impact, and they'll be able to pull that data for us to tell us.
it's also
definitively.
business inside of residential zoning. I still have to make sure that. We'll wait to the end.
You're absolutely right. It is. There's no argument.
All right, I can't wait.
Okay, let's let the team continue forward.
Keep touching. Stop.
No.
Sorry.
We all know the primary purpose of a study session is to understand our policy options about a certain topic and for you all on council to provide us with high-level policy direction about the matter. So this is your opportunity to ask questions that you have about the information and clarify your intent moving forward. The basic questions that we would really like to get feedback on are listed on this slide. So, and I guess I should mention, we have, not surprisingly, already drafted a draft ordinance, which we haven't provided to you because we wanted to get your feedback before we make some final decisions about the structure and organization of the ordinance. So, as we mentioned, the main features are real person holds an STR license. Each person only gets one STR permit. We clarify unlawful acts and we clarify a lot of the processes around issuing licenses and enforcement provisions. So I know we're going to wrap it up with the next slide, but before we move there, we thought we'd get your input on these topics. And Mayor Simpson, if it's okay with you, it may make, because we've got a lot of questions and a lot of people who want to chime in, it may be best if we just go question by question and get everybody's comments on that question and then move on to the next one as much as we can. Would that work for you?
Works totally fine, Nora. Thank you.
Okay. Well, then maybe we'll just start with comments on the first question, which is, looking for input or feedback on a requirement that only a real person hold an STR license.
Well, I have some questions before I can give an opinion on this, which is what is a minimum ownership interest?
So the current draft, it's at 20% or more. And again, it's a draft, so it's not written in stone. Pardon me?
How do they prove that?
Well, what we'll probably do, and these are the line level details that haven't been decided, but the enforcement on this can kind of run the gamut, where we can hire a real estate attorney to figure out what the real estate interest really is, or we can, on the other side, we can just have them file a notarized statement that says, I own 20% of this LLC, or I own this lot personally. And there's, steps in between. So the ordinance doesn't really get into that detail. It just states that you have a minimum ownership interest in the STR property.
So you gave examples of who that would include, like a spouse or the sole owner LLC or something like that. Who does it exclude? Like who, if you have a real person who has to apply for this license, this excludes a company in California that has an LLC and cannot provide. I don't understand.
Yeah, if a local, if there would be, it's not an individual that is willing to step forward who has a 20% minimum interest in that ownership entity, whatever it is, then they would not qualify.
But does it matter where the real person lives?
No.
Okay. And then the other question I have is, so let's say there's an LLC with 5 employees, they're all real people, and to get around this, only one person, the same LLC has those 5 real people apply for a license to operate 5 STRs.
Coming from one LLC.
Coming from one LLC, because we're not limiting it. Any LLC can own it. You're just saying you have to be a real person in order to apply for it.
So yes, in theory, you could have an LLC that owns 5 properties. It has 5 owners, and each of those people could apply to be a licensee for one of those properties.
So that
They
could
would
be,
have the,
yeah.
Councilmember Ambrose, I think the difference there is that if someone is an employee of the organization, the corporation who owns the property, they wouldn't necessarily have an ownership interest in the LLC, if that makes sense. So in order for a company to get away with that, they would have to provide their employees with a 20% ownership interest in that, in the organization, so that they could then serve that role on behalf of the organization.
Well, my point is it costs $1 to create an LLC in Colorado. So if I wanted to, let's say I have 3 properties and I want to keep 3 properties operating, I could, for $1, make a new LLC, new LLC, new LLC, have a completely different business that is actually running the thing. But this is the shell LLC that I use to get around the licensing requirements. Like, that's the kind of thing I'm trying to figure out.
Would only be able to apply for one license. They could own as many LLCs as they want, but each
Right.
person would only be able to
So
apply.
one
for-
person, one property.
Right, yeah. But I mean, like, let's say they originally have the properties through some, I don't know, through some equity investment company. And then they just change it over to this LLC and they say, okay, 3 people, each of you own a third of this LLC. Each of you go apply for a license, because it doesn't matter that you're all from the same LLC as long as you are different ID coming in there. I mean, this is probably worst case scenario, not likely happening, but I'm just trying to figure out how the enactment of this provision actually delivers the results that we're looking for.
Well, I think it makes it better than what we have now.
Yeah.
It provides a step forward in the right direction.
And
Is
towards
it-
accountability, right?
Yeah.
Is what
Yeah.
we're looking for. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's so I think Counselor Davis, you said, what are we trying to do? We're
Yeah,
trying to make sure that we know who to hold accountable, who to reach out to, who does the police go talk to, who do we hold accountable? And this,
So before this change, someone could apply for a license under an LLC, and it's very murky and unclear who the person is that is accountable for that property. And so that's what we're trying to
We
correct.
can, I think there are ways that we can require some documentation that it's clear who the owners of the property are. And the key is that each person only gets one license in Arvada. So they can, I guess, structure this however they want, but at the end of the day, each person who has an ownership, and any person who has an ownership interest in the STRB license, it's only going to be one person and they have to have an ownership interest in the property.
And I think Councilmember Mormon, are you asking what's the current state in
Mhm.
ordinance that we have in place?
What's allowed under the current.
Right, what's allowed in the current ordinance now? And I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we allow LLCs and individuals to apply for those
Mhm.
licenses. And so it gives people way more opportunity to have probably even more than 3, because they can do exactly what you were talking about, Councilmember Ambrose. So what we're trying to do is tighten it up
Mhm.
so that there's less possibility by requiring that you have a warm body who has an ownership interest in that organization,
Mhm.
actually apply for the license. We are reducing the number of licenses that any one person can be responsible for overseeing.
Can I add in an example too? Lakewood does this where they could have 3 owners, part of that LLC with a property, and they all have to sign saying that they will not apply for an additional license. So there's like other, measures or things that they can take to ensure that those 3 individuals, say, who are part of that LLC on that one property, they don't go out and purchase an additional property per their ordinance that only limits the one. So that's something that they've chosen to do to help with that.
Yeah, and I think for this council, if you're able to share with us and we can reach consensus on what's important to you on this, we'll go back and wordsmith and provide the ordinance that then meets that, right? So I think that's what we're looking for, is what's important to you around this particular topic? And then let us go back and then bring you the draft language.
Good, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sharon.
no, I just answered my question.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit, because I have a thought here. It seems like the presumption, and maybe this is right, is that if there are fewer STRs in operation, then we can more easily enforce the bad actors and the bad owners and the bad operators, and prevent them from doing that. I don't know if I agree with that entirely, because there's probably a handful of them that are being operated poorly and they get a lot of attention. And the other ones are operated, I don't know, somewhat day to day, no problem. I don't know if we hear about them. So my question, I guess, is, and what's important to me and what I hear quite frequently is about the ones that are not operating well. So party house, noise, trash.
Yeah, 10% of the,
Yeah.
right?
it's 90% of the effort.
And I think if you
Are we
reduce.
talking about the LLC issue?
No, I'm not talking, I'm just saying in general for STRs. So if the presumption is that there's less of them, we'll have less, or it'll be easier to enforce because of a smaller pool of them operating.
Less licenses per person. We're not proposing a cap on
Okay.
short-term rentals throughout the city. We're just proposing restrictions on who can have them.
Well, all right, same question then. So if I can only have one, but I'm doing a terrible job of operating the one, we still have the same problem. At least the problem that I'm highlighting, which is basically a poorly run STR. If I have 5 and I run them all well, I don't know if I can equate those things as being sort of moving in the direction to get rid of the issue, which is the poorly run
If
party
you run
house.
1 poor and you were running 5, you would run 5 poor. So
Potentially, but hardly anybody does that.
your argument could go the other way too.
That's what he was, I think that's what he was
Providing
trying
more
to say.
tools to focus on the poorly run.
All right, well,
They apply to all of them, but certainly it gives us more tools to focus on the poorly run ones.
I think maybe for me then anyway, we're looking at the limitation on the number per person. And I want to know what we're going to do to enforce the poorly run operations regardless of how many somebody has.
Yeah, and that's where the clarifying roles and responsibilities and processes really comes into play.
So Sharon, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation, because like I said, I just answered my own question. So only a real person may hold an STR
License.
license. Okay,
Permit.
okay. So what if it's like a trust? That is not a real person.
So we do address that if a person is a named beneficiary of a trust, because there are properties that like might be held in a family trust or something. There's different ways you can do that. But if the person is a named beneficiary, we essentially deem them to have that minimum ownership interest. And so a named beneficiary of a trust where the STR property is held by that trust, one of the named beneficiaries can be the licensee for that property.
Thank you.
So I think, Mike, to your question, my understanding from what's been presented is that the problem properties or the problem issues that we're having, part of the challenge is not having someone accountable directly for that problem
Right.
property. And this is trying to address that
Yes.
by saying that you have to have the ownership, you have to have, it can't be just an STR, you have to have a real person, right?
Right. And
But-
yeah, I hear that.
Yeah, to Shauna's point, they don't have to live here.
So, well, that was gonna be my next question, is that the new ordinance would clarify that it would be the licensee applicant would be the one accountable to the things in the ordinance, like the 24-hour response time, the property upkeep, and not necessarily the owner. Like if the owner is some LLC or some company or something like that,
They would be an owner by definition.
right, but the licensee would be the minimum ownership, right? But that would be the named real person.
Yep.
Who would then be the point of contact for the noise complaints, you have to show up within 24 hours, you have to let us into the property for an inspection. Because it's like, those are the kinds of things that with an unnamed person with just a broad LLC. So sure, you can live in California and operate an STR here if you want to, but you have to be accountable to responding within 24 hours, improving the property or whatever else is in the ordinance, right? That's what this change is saying.
Yes.
And
I'm sorry, can I add to that? So per what is current ordinance, you had referenced the 24-hour response time that. So in addition to the license E and the permittee that we have as a real person, we also have a 24-hour contact. And the emergency contact has to be able to respond within 24 hours. So the emergency contact cannot be out of state. So we actually have 2 contacts on that. However, when it comes down to like enforcement of, not paying taxes or having problem properties, we would go back to that person who is the licensee, the permittee to work with, and not the 24-hour contact.
And what is the current repercussions now if you have a emergency contact who is supposed to be local and respond within 24 hours and they don't? What happens?
Well, luckily we have not had that. And now we will talk, and PD's sitting there talking. So that's one of the things that this new ordinance will start to create a buffer around, that we will have more enforcement of that, of more penalties and fines where we can say you didn't respond. This is now what's going to happen with your license. At this point, that what we have is when we hear that there are issues with a problem property, we can come back and we can revoke, we can suspend. We can work with them to get them into compliance. Which is what we're currently doing right now, is just trying to work with that owner. And we don't have a lot in current ordinance to be able to just kind of find them and have that
So
enforcement.
one of the proposals is to add fine.
Yes.
Yes. So,
Build on that real quick, because it's not being somebody available 24 hours, but they have to respond to the property within an hour.
Yes,
Clarify that.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Emergency
60
contact.
minutes, they needed return, because if there's a party or a shooting, like somebody should show up.
A leaking toilet.
Right.
Yeah, so somebody's supposed to show up. So because you're all talking this 24 and it was not quite connected.
Right, they do need to respond within that hour
1 hour.
and,
Okay.
24 hours a day. That's where the two numbers come from.
Thank you, Bob, because I was gonna make sure to emphasize
A
that one
1
as
hour
well.
response.
And for me, if we're looking at ways to finesse this, I would like for the licensee holder to be a resident of the United States, because one of the things that I know, this is rare, but it has happened. We've struggled with chasing down owners of SDRs because they've been international and there've been shell companies, and we've had trouble finding who they are and where they are. So a real person who is in the United States may be a reasonable containment for ownership restriction, while the 24-hour contact must be available within 1 hour's response time.
But can't you always have something that appears local, that's part of a big international consortium? So I think that, I mean, we can go that route, and I think that is perfectly reasonable. I'm just wondering how much staff time would that take to vet that out?
Rebecca.
Can we go to the response summary slide? So I feel like, from the way I understand it as council, we represent the residents, and from what I was looking at, I mean, if the residents were to decide, their voices say they oppose question 1, they oppose question 2, and the real decision by council is with question 3, where it's more of almost a 50-50 split between support and oppose. I have a whole bunch of questions, but I think my first one is, can you elaborate a little bit more on the LLC kind of versus maybe a corporation? And you've mentioned the difference between like the ownership. Can you just elaborate a little bit more and clarify that?
Well, property can be owned by individuals or entities. And currently, under our current ordinance, they can be licensed, an STR property can be licensed to an individual or an entity. My understanding is the majority of our licenses are issued to individuals, but some are issued to entities, and that causes issues. Beyond that, there's not a lot of magic to this.
You could be a corporation.
Yeah.
You could be, the LLC could be a corporation.
Yeah.
But for protection of the property owner, they're gonna want to do an LLC or
Yeah,
something.
usually
So
it's for
Yeah.
civil, it's to reduce civil
Civil,
liability.
yeah.
I think
That's
for-
the usual
for-
reason.
Like, to answer your question too, what's important? So previously I was, or I guess I still am, a yoga teacher, and I started an LLC because if I'm having a class in the park and someone hurts themselves, I don't want to be sued. So I completely I agree with the LLC. You don't want to be sued for something like that. You want to be able to protect yourself. What's really important to me is the kind of cutting out that entity ownership portion. My husband and I have stayed in,
Yeah, we're not cutting out
Any
the
or-
entity
okay.
ownership.
Yeah,
or
and
like,
we
is there any-
learned the hard way. We should have worded the question differently.
okay.
Live and learn. We should have, and if you look through all the comments that we got, people were like, but a lot of people have LLCs for that exact reason, right? To protect self from liability. And shame on us, lesson learned. We can go back and educate the community. What we meant is not that you can still own Rachel and her husband Todd, for example, we have a fake graphic that I created to like demonstrate this. They can own Morrisville, do you want to pull it up, Kristen? It's ridiculous, but it's fun. Oh, sorry. I think if you look at the tabs, I had fun with this is my best friend ChatGPT and I.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Gosh.
I have no idea if this looks like Todd,
Exciting.
but
This.
Rachel and Todd.
Can you open it, make it bigger?
Yeah. Vacation.
Need to see Todd.
Can the folks on the call see this?
Yeah, they can,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes, Morris Vacations LLC own the property, which is great. And the proposal is that's still allowed. Absolutely.
And wouldn't an LLC would be considered an entity that would?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks for-
absolutely.
Thanks for clarifying that.
But-
Okay, that makes sense.
Morris Vacations LLC cannot hold the license. Rachel and Todd have to do rock, paper, scissors to decide whose name is the main responsible party, the natural person who is going to come to City Hall or go online and actually fill out that application form. Now, this was a ChatGPT, so the logo's not right. I know what you're looking at. I know what you're looking at.
I would
So
study
this
the
was
spelling.
down and dirty, but yes. Real quick,
She can do it
I did it
online.
in 2 minutes to
She
just
can
say-
do it online,
Yes.
right?
Exactly. But essentially, Rachel herself needs to come in and apply for that, or, needs to go online. Needs to apply for the license so that if there's a hot tub party at 2 a.m.
Let's abolish hot tubs in the city of
Rachel will
we're-
get-
Yes, exactly. So that's who we're taking enforcement against.
That makes sense.
So
But that's
let's get
what
rit of
the-
that before
Yeah,
council
becomes a
fight
thing.
critiques my
I
AI
don't own
words.
anything in Scottsdale.
So you're objecting.
That is funny.
Now,
So that's
actually
the kind of the real person requirement. So this goes back to that first question that we wanted comment on.
Yeah.
And feedback is. What we're
It's
asking is, are
consensus, yeah.
people comfortable with using a real person to hold an
Yes.
STR license?
Yes.
are we saying yes to only a real person?
Yeah,
the license, just
is
for the
all-
license. For the
That's the
license.
question.
Just the license?
Yes,
Okay,
that's
And
been an
then-
issue.
the number of licenses that may be held by a person. Right now, we allow 3, and as Candace pointed out, that we're an outlier in that. Most other cities, and I think not just the ones on the chart, but I think most other larger Colorado cities only allow 1. Or they allow only owner occupied or what have you, but really they just allow 1. And so our question is, do we want to limit this to 1 STR license per person? And the caveat to that is for those few people that own more than 1, do we want to do a step down?
I think.
Which would be over a period of years, excuse me.
I think it's worth looking at the data for the number of people that are actually doing it, and it's a small number. I'm curious, for 4 for 3, right?
And 21 for 2.
And 21 for 2. I'm curious for
Currently
the,
licensed.
do we have any idea for the unlicensed?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be.
That would
yes,
be interesting to
that would be
know.
So,
Interesting.
so just think 40% are not in compliance with our current
And-
ordinance.
And we'll be in the corner. We might have information.
Yeah. So for the unlicensed short-term rentals, there's 235 addresses that we've identified, and of those, there's 6 owners with 2 properties or more, but nobody with 3.
Okay.
And they're unlicensed for many reasons.
It seems to me, just looking at that number, and then also the numbers have been somewhat stable. We've got like at least the people that are following and in compliance and have licenses. The numbers have been steady over the last several years. Is that right? I think I heard that
Yes.
in the presentation. It seems to me reasonable. If it's not 3, I don't know that it needs to be 1. You could do like, it's the house that you live in and it's 1 more, but that's it.
Wheat Ridge is what Wheat Ridge has as a compromise.
Similar.
Yeah, one's owner occupied and one is.
Or the
Yeah.
ADU, right?
And what do we consider owner occupied all the time,
Primary
50%
Primary.
of the year?
So that's 6 months
So
of
I
a
can
day.
rent I can rent my house out for half of the year while I'm snowbirding somewhere.
But I mean, that's not currently in our, that's
But your
the
primary
question.
resident couldn't be rented out. It's the ADU or whatever on there would be rented
I
out. So if you're
didn't know.
snowbird out,
Yeah, if I'm snowbirding out, you're not saying.
your house stays empty, the ADU or whatever, so it could be a short-term rental.
Unless.
Oh,
If you're only at 1, but if you can have 2,
yeah,
then you
Well, I
could
think
have
that
that
gets a little
flexibility.
weird because
per
next thing your
address.
primary residence
because
is also,
I have, state an STR where somebody was doing something somewhere else.
But that's not what that, well,
I'm just saying, because they're, maybe they're out of compliance because they don't they do snowbird in another state. And then they rent their house out to
big
skiers.
leap.
That's an example of an owner occupied.
Okay.
So Councilmember Griffith, I think what you're suggesting then is two. Are you looking at that Wheat Ridge model with one as the primary residence and one as non-primary, or just two in general?
I personally like the tying one to primary residence. I've said that for years. I'm revising some of my previous thoughts based on the feedback that we got from the public. Honestly, the responses to those questions surprised me. But I'm also thinking that making the real person requirement, I think, satisfies a lot of the concern of being able to reach somebody. And so I'm not sure, especially given the amount of participation at the higher, like 2 and 3, I'm not sure that matters as much as being able to identify the person that holds the license and get in contact with.
Could we see what other members of council think
Okay.
about that?
Sure.
I appreciate it. Really quickly, though, because I agree with Mike's statement about the results are frankly kind of shocking. And on this level of scale balance, having been involved on this issue for as long as we've had it, Bob and I were original voters on this. It does not line up with multiple years of public feedback in any way. Bob, you can back me up on this one. And so I'm curious then, was this a scientifically weighted, valid survey sampling, or is it just feedback from residents that chose to take it and
Can be biased.
and could be biased, and then therefore this is an important data sampling point, but we have to be appreciative of the fact that it could have been biased.
So we went back and asked existing short-term rental owners. We went back to previous complaints that we've received on Comcate. So we went back to the people that had the primary concerns as far back as we could go and reached out to them as well, in addition to a broader survey. This is not statistically valid. We don't have the time or the resources to always do statistically valid. It's a point in time and really trying to capture what is the flavor with respect to these particular issues. And so we did ask the people that have talked to them.
It's a data point. It's one data point among other things.
Yeah, let me just can I build on that? Because I was looking at the actual further in the sheets and I was struggling with that too, because it's hard for somebody who we went to complaints to have 51 people oppose us enforcing fines. And so it just seemed weird to me when you broke that non-STR owner down further. It did seem very biased when you started looking at that. I wouldn't even say the residents. I just think they're people that have just done it. So I just had I struggled with this. I wish we started with this first because I struggled with the survey out of all the ones I've seen before, just because I wish we saw the further ones down that broke those out.
Donna wasn't Sean.
Yeah, so I have a lot of questions in order to weigh in on how many. One is, who pays for the cost of the inspection? Is that part of the licensing fee?
The licensee.
Okay, and are we going to be increasing the licensing fee to be able to afford Granicus?
We've already increased the license fee. It went up from $175 to $350.
Okay, and are most of these SDRs located in affordable areas and in District 2? Because that's where housing density,
They're distributed all over the city.
pretty evenly.
I don't know if it's evenly, but they're distributed all over the city.
Okay. And then I don't know if I heard this right. So you all presented that there were 87 Comcate complaints in 2025. But did I hear right that the calls to the police department
350.
are 350?
So we can get into this. There's a lot of, data. And this was an attempt to look at the primary sources that we utilize for getting feedback is Comcate and our code enforcement team. And so maybe our code enforcement officers can talk a little bit about how they coordinate with PD on some of these issues, because sometimes the data can become duplicative. So we really tried to look at our sources of data that are as clear as possible, recognizing that there are going to be independent phone calls that are sent over to PD. We don't know if PD always logs those into Comcate. We don't know if they're always checking with code enforcement on it, but our intent
I
is
feel
that we
like to
try.
avoid duplication, then we could say, okay, maybe all 87 of these are duplicative. The 350 calls we've had to our police department. And what are the majority of the calls about? Yeah,
Can I clarify that? Council?
yeah.
I think one of the things that's important to understand is call for service could also be, if lead Krentz goes out to do an enforcement action on a property, that goes in as a call for service. So it's not necessarily a call to the police department asking for service.
Okay.
It's a call for service. So we can't break down how many times an STR or somebody is called to wanting police services at an STR.
Okay.
We can say that if someone called in a trash can, there's one call. But then Peter going out and following up on that, that'll show a second. And then if he does a third inspection, that'll be a third call for service. So
Okay.
it's a variety of things, and we don't have the technology through our dispatching to be able to delineate from those different calls for service.
So these 87 complaints and the 350, it seems like it could be really duplicative of like,
There would be some
because you're just
redundancy,
logging in
yeah.
every time you
Yeah.
respond to a complaint that comes in. Okay, that's great. Because I was like, I can't believe 350 people have called 911 about an SDR, but have only complained 87 times. That's what I was very confused about that. The other thing I wanted to ask is what is unpermitted changes to STR properties? What does that mean?
That would be if somebody is doing something to an STR that did not get a permit. So let's say they, here's an example. They put a sauna in the living room, which happens.
Real example.
Or a hot tub in, you know.
Ellie,
that
you're
they
not
didn't-
allowed to do that.
Right. So
Okay.
those types of, and what may happen is somebody may call and say, I don't know, I was just over here and this doesn't look familiar to me. I'm not sure if this was permitted. You know, we don't get that many, but we do get a few. Part of what the inspections can really help us with, and they are primarily focused on life safety issues. What we want to make sure of is that people that are using that short-term rental are safe and that they're not going to be harmed by any of these things that are happening within the short-term rental. The only way that we can guarantee that is getting an inspection. And if we don't look at it every year, things can change over the course of a year. And especially if that property has been permitted for 5 years and they got an inspection the first year, and then for 5 years, we have no idea, and there's a hot tub and there's a sauna, there's a new deck and
Right.
all of those things. So that's really why we want to see those inspections happening on a more regular cadence. It's for life safety. It's not frou-frou stuff. It's really making sure
Well, yeah,
it's
'cause
safe.
I feel like some unscrupulous people could be like, oh, I added a bonus bedroom. And it's like,
Exactly.
that is not up to code at all.
It's looking at egress.
Sorry, so
It's looking
I
at that.
have a few more questions and then I'll be done. So what is the city's reasoning for recommending going down? Because considering Councilmember Griffith's point that there's like maybe 10 properties total that going down to 1 would apply to, and assuming that same rate for the registered ones is about the same for the unregistered ones, so maybe like 20 total for the 700 or so.
About 25 that are currently licensed and about 6 that are currently unlicensed, so 31.
So 31. So why would you recommend this when it's such a small part? Is it because of like the future forecasting? Like we don't want to pass this and have it be like open season, get your 3 properties in now and or something? What are you thinking about this recommendation?
I will say that over the past year, the tenor of comments and the information we've been getting from council has been suggesting that this is a pretty urgent issue that needs a lot of work. So we proposed this. If the council doesn't feel comfortable with that, that's fine. We're really here to get your feedback. The idea is that we are trying to respond to what the concerns have been. We didn't know what the public was going to say about this. We didn't know what the council was going to say about it, but we're really trying to react to what we heard.
Okay, I mean, because I am in favor of limiting it down to 1 because of how many people have been complaining about it. And I think, the oversight of it, but I don't feel very hard pressed for it, knowing that it's like 31 properties we're talking about here, so. And then one more question I have unrelated to the question and feedback you're asking for is, I know one suggestion the council had was requiring a 3-night minimum stay to cut down on the party houses or 2-night stay. Was that policy examined?
Proposed ordinance, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, good.
We didn't talk about everything, but there are a few little Easter eggs in there. You'll see.
Okay,
But
great.
these are really kind of the core things. that-
Okay.
Good to know.
Yeah.
That'd be great. And Shauna, this is anecdotal, but just to add on to a question you had a minute ago, I just had family come and stay over Christmas, and because they're a large family, they got a short-term rental. So I looked just at the maps online. I would say a solid majority are in districts 2 and 3. There are some in 1, there are some in 4, but the higher density is 2 and 3.
So still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know if limiting, to one person, one property, if that would solve the affordability problem or not, or if it solves a future problem of, companies coming in and getting their 3 and now and saying, I have this, I deserve this income stream, don't take it away from me, like the 31 people who have it right now probably are saying. So, yeah.
Are we grandfathering?
So off of what you're mentioning, is our goal with limiting it so that we can manage it better, we can enforce better? Is that kind of the idea?
Accountability.
Administrative
enforcement.
burden.
Because I think another question I would have off of that is it sounds like a question of what can we handle as a city between enforcement and licenses and managing that. I personally would love to see just a little bit of information around a citywide cap. I think for me, we have a toddler and we do not stay in hotels because we like the way a short-term rental sets up. Recently, we were visiting somewhere and basically the day before we arrived, we were not able to go to that place. They kind of dropped it on us, but we were able to move to a different one. I think just questioning around the tourism side of things by, bringing in folks coming in, if it's changing the number of stays, but these short-term rentals bring in tourism, which brings in, sales tax. And we want that in Old Town. I've had families stay there. So for me personally, I personally oppose the limit. I would like to see how discovering the unlicensed affects things, how shifting over to the real person affects things before we make a bigger decision like that. So a couple of questions. Can we have different standards for different areas? Like what works in Old Town, limiting it versus kind of maybe what works somewhere else in Arvada?
So I would say a couple things, getting back to the idea of a cap. Some jurisdictions handle it that way. You'll see that happening in a lot of resort towns. You see that in Estes Park, where I used to work. We had a cap.
Breckenridge is.
Breckenridge, Steamboat Springs, they all have caps. We are not a resort community. We did not design our short-term rental ordinance around that paradigm.
Okay.
If the entire council decides you want to look at caps, we need to take this all back to the drawing board and redo it.
Okay.
Because at this point, what we were directed to do was to focus on a short-term rental ordinance, looking at our existing standards, not with new ideas proposed, and we just hadn't anticipated that. So what I would say in terms of, sorry, your second question was about, I apologize.
Different areas.
Different areas.
Yeah.
I think that
Different
really
areas.
just comes down to administrative burden. We
100%,
have
yeah.
one person on our team that is able to really kind of oversee all of our licensing in CED. It would be very difficult for us to be able to look at those applications and to be able to have differentiation between different areas. And frankly, I think the big question is, would there be a reason for it? Is there any purpose to it? And we don't see one yet. I think you're absolutely right, looking at, if the ordinance does get changed and if we do see these changes come into effect, let's look at them and let's evaluate them. That's why we call it planning, because we're never done. There's always an opportunity for us to come back and to say, you know what, that part of the code didn't quite work the way that we wanted it to. But this is, again, as alluded to, we're all experimenting with short-term rentals. This is a brand new thing that has come up in the last decade or two, and it is wreaking havoc on communities and also on us as regulatory agents, as an agency, to try and deal with it.
Quickly, I think this might be a really good, because we still got to get around to doing the sort of table poll on question 2. That means we're maybe roughly halfway done. This would be a good point to call just like a 3-minute break. Everybody grab your food and then we'll come back here to the table to continue the conversation.
You should do that.
What I signed up for.
I'm gonna tell my assistant.
Commercialization of residential zones.
Got my opinion.
Shaky, so. For question one, I think I've already articulated that I'm in favor of the first part of that question. When it gets back-
LLCs.
Yes.
Real
that-
person,
We
yeah.
have a real person, thank you. And then I think as far as the limits, I honestly could go either way and need to hear more about what the impact of that would be. So I'm gonna be undecided on that at the moment. Sorry for not providing you more clarity.
All right. Would anybody else like to weigh in on the question of total number?
Go around the table. Yeah, to just go around on question two, I am in favor of limiting it to one, but I could see a compromise like with what Councilmember Davis has of like the 31 that can keep all the ones that they have now, but to prevent like from the future just being totally oversaturated with a bunch of people, a bunch that we don't allow anymore.
So I'm sorry, just so I heard, so one idea might be limit to one, but
Yeah.
grandfather in existing
Yeah.
licensees to up to have what they currently have. Is that your proposal?
Yeah.
For their existing
That's why I asked, is there a
licenses.
grandfather?
Right.
Because we don't want them to go out and get new ones.
Right.
That may be actually backdated to like December 1st or something, so that people can't rush in, pick up multiple licenses.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great idea, Nora.
Cause I was gonna do that.
Bob.
I think one real person's fine, and I'm good with who owns it. As far as the existing, it would be nice if they would get in compliance of the ownership of the owner license portion part of it. Just because those are LLCs and those are probably some of our problem ones. So we need them to come in. Otherwise, I would push for a step down on that until we get like a real necktie for the license on that 31 properties. It
Okay.
can't be an LLC as a licensee.
So you're saying allow existing that have more than one to keep them, provided everybody gets into compliance on the natural person holding the license.
Oh.
Okay,
So it's easy enforcement. All the other conditions still apply, but they could keep their 3 for now. But all the new conditions they have to be okay with.
do we have consensus on that?
Rebecca.
So I oppose the shifting from the 3 to 1 at this time. I would like to see how this new platform plays out and discovering the unlicensed, how limiting it to real people affects, and then maybe deciding that. But just don't want to make too many changes all at once and then not know which one affected the impact.
Which lever worked.
Well, the good part is we've only done this for years and this is third time. So we can change it again next year. So we're not gonna get it perfect.
That's right.
I'm fine with the real person. I don't see justification to limit the number of licenses at this point.
Dr. Sharon.
There.
Okay, so 3 and 3, that's great.
We do not have consensus. How would you
I
like
think
this to
Mike
be?
said it differently though. He's like, no cap?
No cap.
That's what he's saying. You're not asking that question though.
I thought you said you're not in favor of reducing the number of licenses someone can hold.
No, no.
Yeah.
I don't think that,
So grandfather the existing ones?
I wouldn't say grandfather. I wouldn't say change it at all. I think we've solved a lot of the issue with having a neck to ring, so to speak.
So keep the current 3.
Sure.
What I'm hearing from councilors Levison, Griffith, and Davis is keep the current 3. And what I'm hearing from councilors Mormon, Ambrose, and Pfeiffer is step down to 1 for new applicants.
New applicants, only 1.
Yeah.
Right.
Grandfather the old.
Yeah, there is it. So we don't have consensus on this.
So
You're saying you still want people to have
that's
3.
tiebreaker.
So how do you do 3 with person owning 20%? That means that 20%, we won't have one necktie for one property. We'll have one necktie for 3 properties.
I think it's off of the comment and like, this is someone's income. That's kind of some questions I have there. But the bigger picture is seeing how these other decisions we make, like limiting it to a real person, how that affects things, and then maybe looking at this. But
The other thing I'll add is that a short-term rental can also be used as a long-term rental. So
Right.
if they did lose their license, they can still own it. They would just have to rent it out for longer periods of time.
And I'm curious how much they actually do right now. I'm sure we get that data from that software. how much
We would
they're-
know if they're operating it as a short-term rental.
Because since that one across the street, I mean, I could see it's maybe a couple times a month at most. It's rented, so I mean. I'm more worried at quality of life of the operations of a business in a residential community. Of churning of people in a quiet community.
I think
And I get why I use them as well in resort towns. But in a bedroom community, we're not resort, we're not tourism, we don't have a mall, but we have taken stock away from first time home buyers and others for some reason or other. I think there should be some short-term rentals. I just don't believe I don't think they add the value at the level of our community that they should. I mean, the one across the street, it's in compliance now. Thank you. But now they've been in compliance, it's been fine, it's been no big issue. But I just don't think that if I live in a block of 15 homes and 3 of them hypothetically were short-term rentals, then what's the sense of community? Where's my sense of place? Where's my home? I've moved into my community because I expect to have long-term neighbors.
Well, I
But
mean,
yeah, when
these
it's-
are things we can say on the dais.
Yeah, and I
We're
will say it
talking
on the
about what's
dais.
the ordinance you're gonna bring forward, and you all will write an ordinance that 3 of us will be for, and 3 of us
Yeah,
will be
that's true.
against.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
we can talk about it. and have the-
Necessarily for
Yeah,
or against.
I like
it's a
how you
compromise.
realize there's still a vote left on the table. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't want it to be, but.
The mayor hasn't made a decision.
But hold on, out of fairness, so this is a decisive, 4 to 3 is not always a good thing, or 3 to 4, however you want to look at it.
Right.
We probably on this subject need to go a little further than a 4-3. That's not in the suit of this weekend, what we're trying to look for. So I'm just sharing a view of a sense of community is something I am absolutely 100% focused on, and I'm only focused on businesses and people that are interested in our community. And I can tell you, when you have short-term rentals in a community, that's not always the case. It's 50-50. I say there's some that are good, there's some that are bad. I'm not gonna say they're all bad, but we need to limit the phone calls. You know, we've had a bad situation before you all got on with the rental, and we need to try to minimize, because that was just this, and we were confused, and who was calling who and who
Well,
was
even
doing
before
what.
the shooting, I brought up the fact that there were so many enforcement gaps, especially in District 2.
Yeah.
Like in District 2, this is a top complaint from my constituents of people who are dealing with party houses, who are dealing with trash. And I've had 2 residents told me they've moved because they cannot get, the one,
Oh, I'm
the
aware.
guy, you know who I'm talking about?
Mr. O'Rourke?
Right, he's moving.
Dennis is moving?
He's moving because of a short-term rental. So I feel like this is having a real negative impact. The fact that this ordinance is not right.
I think the question, just in response to that, and then we can move on, is to me, the concern is safety. Do you feel safe in your neighborhood and that bullets aren't going to come in through your refrigerator? And then the next question is that because someone owns 3? Or is that because we don't have a real person to contact? And that's just what I'm
I
saying.
agree with that.
I think we all agree it's safety. And then I just want to say, like, well, let's see how these other decisions kind of impact that. That's my perspective.
And the other thing I'll say is I know the city's position on affordable housing is that we have 51,000 units. This is about 700 units, so not a huge effect. But at the same time, the housing survey that we had done shows that we are short 2,700 units of affordable housing. And given that these short-term rentals are often taking up affordable housing that could be rental units, that is a quarter of the affordable housing right there if these were all rented out instead of short-term rentals. And so that's why I also want to keep it to just 1, because I'm thinking about the future of affordable housing stock in Arvada. Do we have a policy that incentivizes short-term rentals or rentals where people can actually live here, teachers and all the other folks that need affordable
Thank you,
housing?
Sharon, then I'm gonna weigh in and then we're gonna move to question 3.
So the thing about affordable housing and these short-term rentals, if I had a short-term rental and we stepped down, if I had 3 and we stepped down to 1, I'm either going to rent or sell at market. I'm not going to rent or sell at the 60 to 80% AMI because that I would be losing money. on that property. Yeah, I would be selling a $600,000 property or that something the county says is worth $600,000. I would be selling it for $425. That is never gonna
But
happen.
market rate in where these short-term rentals are popping up is the affordable housing stock.
But I understand that,
That's
but
available.
it's what's available. But if I were to sell it, or if I were going to rent it, I'm renting it at market. There's nothing saying that I'm gonna rent it at
Market
affordable.
with Section 8 housing vouchers.
And I understand that, but would I?
Okay.
Because now you have Section 8 living in your neighborhood.
There's
Now
nothing wrong. I
your
had
neighbors-
I had an apartment that had all Section
Okay,
8. There was
okay,
nothing.
we're railing a little bit, kind of close on this, because my thoughts are actually in line. So one of the things I have noticed living in District 2 and being part of the area that has quite a few of these is what we've seen is elderly residents passing away or moving out or whatnot. The house is purchased by a fix and flipper, and then they crank up the price by about $300,000-400,000, and then they can't move it and they convert it to a short-term rental because they're holding the property. They're not actually selling at market rate because they put it at a list price that the market is not justifying. And so this is a much bigger conversation. And to the point earlier, this is a great conversation for the dais if we want to have this one for the larger public, because this is a much more fulsome conversation. However, where I stand on this particular question, just having been watching this issue for a long time, while actually, if I were given my preference, I like Mike's proposal about the two, sort of the Wheat Ridge model, one primary, one additional. But if my two options are as is versus one with grandfathered, I will go with the one and grandfathered. Because I also agree with Councilmember Levison's point about staff capacity. I do have concerns. We have one employee who investigates and processes, and we are at 1.22% of the current housing stock market. And that is heavily densified into the south and eastern parts of the city. So I have some concerns. So right now, I will say we can restrict for the future to one, but I don't want to penalize those who have currently played by the rules. Specifically, those 25 who have played by the rules, not necessarily the 6 who have not. All right, question 3, let's go.
Okay, so question 3 is, any feedback on the proposal that we are clarifying the most common unlawful acts relating to STR provisions. So a lot of these unlawful acts are scattered in different parts of the code. We are simply consolidating them and bringing them into the actual STR ordinance so that, for example, an owner who wants to know what are the most common unlawful acts, they would have them pretty much in one place. Not to say that every single unlawful act would be in one place, but they would have a whole list of, oh, I need to be, they would know that they're accountable for this, or I know I'm responsible for that. Mr. Moore.
So this is the part that I would want to see a lot more detail on, because I think this is the crux of the issue when we talk about problem properties. And, how do we avoid those party renters? And so I didn't see anything in the presentation about this, but you mentioned the minimum night stay, for example, was something you were drafting. And so I would want to see those details of what you're proposing around this, because I think that is, to me, what's really important at getting at these few problem properties that we have. And so for me, the minimum night stay is something I'm very interested in. I'm also interested in what other things we can do to avoid the party renters, like the minimum number of occupancy or whatever we can do to really to restrict the party activity, because that seems to be the biggest problem. While it's a few properties, it's still one of the largest challenges that we have. So that's my focus, and I want to hear more details on what you have to offer around that specifically.
And we do have minimum occupancy formulas in here so that, for example, if a police officer is called to one of these at 1 a.m, and in fact, the occupancy limits will be listed on the permit, and the permit, we require that the permit be posted at the main entrance to the STR. So and it has to be there. If it's not, that's a violation. But a police officer can come in, and if they see a party of 40 people and they go to the permit and the permit says, look, this is, you've got like 3 bedrooms or whatever, that allows you 6 people. And then we allow 6 people on top of that. So the maximum occupancy for that STR is going to be 12. And if they see there's 40 people there, they can actually ticket the whoever has, well, I can probably ticket anybody over the age of 18 at the party, but they'll ticket whoever the guest is. So there will be minimum occupancy or maximum occupancy requirements, and they'll be very easy for a police officer to locate.
Rebecca, do you have your hand up?
Not yet.
I
We're gonna
apologize.
go-
I thought I did. I thought I
We're
saw.
going around?
I thought we were going around.
All right,
Yeah,
let's just go
Sean
around.
is next.
Yeah, I appreciate the suggestions and support them. I don't have any further comments.
I do too. The one that pops in my mind is I think we tightened up this part of the ordinance, but I think of the marijuana house, over there by Apex. They painted the house neon.
Oh, God, like that
Neon.
fuchsia color. I remember that. Oh.
It's
So I
They did it on purpose,
But
and then I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody here might remember, but I believe it was a marijuana grower who promoted that as you can come to Colorado, smoke my pot and stay in my place.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Oh,
And yeah, and that was right in Van Arsdale Elementary
I
School.
bet his neighbors love that.
And it was on the
really?
corner, so you could see it at the stoplight, you know, everyone could see what he was advertising. But did we stop that? Because that caused an uproar in that community.
So you're talking probably about two things there. The first thing is the aesthetic.
Yeah, the look
piece of
was
it.
one,
Yeah.
and then the
And,
way it
you
was
know,
being
we
operated.
really don't get too, the city doesn't get overly involved in how people paint their houses, although I think a city rep did negotiate with that owner and resolve that piece of the problem.
Yeah,
So we took care of it, not because we had the legal authority to do so, but just because we asked
Called
him to
them.
be a good neighbor.
Yeah.
But
but the marijuana, I think they can't smoke marijuana inside, right? Is that?
well,
Thank you.
and an STR owner can put that in the rental contract, but it is legal if it's legal to use marijuana in a particular place, we wouldn't step in and regulate that inside a home.
It's interesting. We don't have the same, leeway, like you can't have smoking in a public establishment.
This is a
Well,
private.
yeah, I don't-
We can't regulate legally. If it is legal in the state of Colorado, we do not have the authority to say it can't be done in these locations. The private property owner can dictate that rule for their property, but we as a government entity cannot ban it.
And there's that constitutional amendment that passed. It really restricts the way that we're able to regulate marijuana use, particularly if it's inside of a private residence or business.
Does this tie into that issue with the gentleman who had an issue that somebody was smoking pot and was going over the fence into his house?
I remember.
That was
That was
just two
my
property. Yeah, was that just two properties or was that an STR? I can't remember.
No.
Two properties.
I remember specifically if one of those was an FTR, but
Can't be
either way.
regulated. It can't be enforced.
Because I think they were sitting in a hot tub or something like that.
Yeah.
And smoking pot and it was just going into the other property.
There was an instance of that at an STR, but I think it's also occurred with private residents. too.
say,
All right,
Yeah.
so we're not solving that in this ordinance, that's what I'm hearing.
just
Yeah, although-
enjoy it.
And this is anecdotal, but I asked one of the attorneys in our office to just do a quick analysis of how many STRs in Arvada advertises like
A pot house.
education or
420,
marijuana. Yeah,
420.
420. He ran a whole bunch of keywords through
It's fun.
the various databases and he brought back some information to me, which I don't have access to here, but it was like a shockingly small number. I
Okay,
would
so
have
it's-
thought that,
So
like
it's gone down
20%.
probably over the years.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
it-
at first it was a
yeah.
big, like a tourist attraction to Colorado is come here.
Yeah.
and We drive around in the bus.
It's legal in half the states now. It's just not a big thing.
Federalize it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but let it.
So
Yeah,
maybe
he
they
signed
just
an
don't
executive
advertise
order,
it
which
because
means
people
it's
realize
completely
it's illegal or something, but in terms of just advertising it as marijuana friendly or 420 friendly or Christians, that is extremely.
Go on.
Lauren, where have you been hanging out? The Kush station, you know.
All right.
Start regulating our.
People know how funny that actually is.
Okay. Bob, any final thoughts?
No, thanks for answering this.
Rebecca?
So I'm in favor of the stronger enforcement, and from what we have, it looks like most people are as well. I love that we're gonna clarify roles and responsibilities. I did notice some comments around parking and yards, so just wondering if we're gonna kind of include that. And then my other question was, a certain number of fines means you're revoked license, or like kind of the penalties around if you get so many fines, what happens after that?
Yeah. So the way it's set up now, and again, this is just a proposal and we'll be following this conversation, we'll be meeting with some the subject matter experts to figure out how this all gets ironed out. But we have a relatively progressive attitude toward enforcement. And so we want to work with people is the way I understand it. We don't just move in and hit them with a ticket, although it is easier to ticket people under this ordinance than it has been in the past. If we are at the point where we actually ticket somebody and they are convicted of an offense relating to their STR, then that will automatically move to like an administrative process where the CED director would have the ability to suspend or revoke their license. And it would be pretty easy because we would have a conviction in the municipal court of the underlying criminal offense. There may be some other ways that we can move toward tweaking someone's license, but that would be the primary one. And I'm still kind of working out the details on that because we don't want to allow people to have so many delays through the court process that it delays administrative action. So we'll work out the details on that. So I don't know if that answers your
It
question.
does, and thank you. Thank you for all the hard work to everyone put into this. Appreciate it.
Mike.
So yeah, I'm definitely in favor of these last two bullet points here, but one thing I'd add, I would be very interested in looking at a minimum 3 night instead of a minimum 2 to really reinforce that it's not just a 1 night party. I think that makes it a little bit more difficult to organize the sale of 3 days instead of just 2. So something to put out there. I was going to ask a question about the fine, so I'm glad that I heard some of that. What is the fine for an infraction? Like,
So currently, in the current ordinance, it's part of the LVC, and surprisingly or not, all offenses in the LVC are both finable and jailable. So the fine and every violation, you can get charged every day. So every day you could, in theory, you could be fined up to $2,650, or you could go to jail for up to, I believe it's 6 months. So it's a pretty
substantial.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I would call that
get most
substantial.
people's attention. And we are not changing, that maximum is set in the city code. We are not changing those maximums. The only thing we are doing in this is we are providing guidance to the municipal court about setting minimum fines so that for a first offense, your minimum fine would be X, and for a second offense in a certain period of time, it would be Y,
Right.
or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think it rapidly discouraging offenses is preferred. One of the things that I've heard from multiple folks that have complained to me about different STRs is the response time for code compliance creates a little bit of a gap where the property owner can fix whatever issue is going on. And so then it kind of goes away. So a bunch of garbage and food sitting out by the street and raccoons going through it. He makes a call, this is Dennis. And then code enforcement comes out a couple days later and then it's gone. And then it happens again, the cycle sort of repeats. And so he can't preemptively say it's out there and then the next day it's out there so that he can get the code compliance. So just in general, the response time question so that an infraction can be observed, I think should be considered because it leads to a lot of the frustrations.
Okay.
So when we're talking about fining the STR owner or the person, if there is something unlawful going on and the police make an arrest, is that on the person who is arrested who is renting, or is it on the STR owner? So if the STR owner says, and if you read the small print in all of your agreements, it says no outside events. And so the renter decides to have an outside event. It's not, they already know the rules are that you can't have one. And then something happens and the police make an arrest. Are we holding the STR owner's toes to the fire, or the person who was arrested?
It would be the person who allowed the occupancy limits to be exceeded, and that would be.
Well, and it might not even be the occupancy exceeding. They might have 6 unrelated people come and have a jubilee, and then all of a sudden somebody gets arrested. And so they've met the 3-night rule, they've met the occupancy rule. They just have some nefarious something or other going on. And so I think we need to make sure that we delineate that too, because it could be the good faith that the owner, they signed the contract and everything, all the i's are dotted and the t's are crossed, and then the renter decides to be foolhardy. So I wanna make
The
sure.
renter would be charged.
Okay,
I'm not a law enforcement officer, but
right, yeah.
I think it's fair to say that the renter would
Well,
be,
and I think
whoever is
that's-
responsible for the violation would be charged.
Well,
The
and
owner
that's,
wouldn't have any way to know.
so then I move toward responsible trash. So at the end of a lot of the STRs that I've rented that are homes, they say, put the trash can on the curb when you leave. And so we do, but we may have, number one, just missed pickup date that might be, we don't know when the pickup date is. And so it may sit out there for a week, or something, I don't know. Maybe you just don't know the local laws and the top is up just a little bit, I don't know. But are we holding, those are some violations that.
I think what your answer has been, it's like a case by case basis
Right,
and that you
okay.
have
As it is in
progressive
every-
discipline.
Every.
Yeah, because it's like, you know, I could
just wanna make
see
sure.
the first time
Nickel
your
and
rental
diming.
got turned into a frat house,
Mhm.
that they worked with you and they, you know, and you're like, I'm so sorry this happened. The second time, there's a noise complaint. The third time, it's like, okay, clearly you're doing something in how you are running this STR that
Right.
it continues to violate, but
But if they don't, if they just have it once, that's the
Yeah.
one.
The one nice thing about having that 1 hour response time is that it gives the opportunity for us to let that emergency contact know that we have a problem. That trash needs to get picked up. You need to respond to this. And so I think it's really that the step up and how we respond to those issues and how we can get that information back to the people that run that short-term rental so that we don't have these ongoing problems that are really just nuisances. They're not life safety issues.
right, okay.
Right.
Perfect. Yeah, I second what Sharon was saying. I don't want to penalize good faith property owners because somebody violated the terms of agreement, obviously. My sense is I absolutely support the increased enforcement, just to be able to give our team and our officers the tools that they need to be able to make sure the peace of the community is maintained. And to the trash thing, which is a very frequent flyer one, I will say. With my cousins having just done an Airbnb, I want to commend those Airbnb owners because it was the idea Nancy Ford had on the diet way back then about putting the book with the permits. These folks had a book and it had the entire city's ordinance policy, including our noise ordinances and everything right there. I was like, good job, good job. The one thing they were missing, which I couldn't find, was what day to put out the trash, which obviously I would look for. And even I couldn't find it. So maybe having that as just a tweak is have instructions for your guests on what day and by what time to put down the trash cans and when to bring them up might solve this frequent issue.
Mayor?
That's the last, I still have comment on the last
Okay.
question.
No,
Can I
go
go
ahead.
last one? Okay,
Yeah,
since
go
I
ahead.
didn't, I was waiting to come back around on the last one, but did we resolve the administrative process of if we do a revoke because of like the last issue? I think there was some role clarity between the CED and the attorney's office. Did we clarify that and we're good
Well,
with that?
So yes, it'll be clarified and we're talking about both the ordinance and the program rules. So between those two documents, that's where we're trying to clarify these roles and responsibilities because there are a lot of stakeholders in all this.
Right. And I think in that scenario with the shooting, it was like, well, who's on first, who's on second,
Yeah.
what's happening, who did what, wait, hold on, let's do this, no, let's not. I don't wanna, because that just forked the community because it was lack of response for several days. So, and it was not, I don't think anything intentional, it was just first time us going through a threshold of problems that were at that magnitude. So as long as we can iron that out, I'm good with the last one.
I have one addition. This was mentioned to me recently, the process to actually get your license, if you have an STR, I've heard was difficult. And I'm wondering with the number of non-compliant unlicensed STRs, if there's anything that can be done to make getting the license, I don't know if it's streamlined or I don't want to say easier, but you do have some older folks that are trying to just get an STR in their property or something, and it may be more complicated than they're willing to go through. So if we can look at that and make sure there's nothing that we can do to improve that process.
We run, excuse me, all of our applications through Track It. So we all know we don't like Track It. So any of those complaints need to be taken with a grain of salt. We're in the process of trying to update that. If people have problems navigating our system, and I've never heard that anybody's had any concerns about the process,
Sure.
then they can reach out to me and we can help them.
Okay, I will refer them.
I'm sorry.
Just come here.
Yeah, we're happy.
I haven't tried to do it personally, but someone did say that I just couldn't figure it out, so I just run it without the license. And I was like, well, don't do that.
Well, we'll find them and we'll remind them.
We'll find them.
Okay.
See, that's, well, I wanted to talk to this too. I want to make sure that when we go to these 200 and some odd unpermitted STRs, that maybe this is our opportunity to really have something that we can step them through, like a quick reference guide or something like that, to step them through the permitting process and also have maybe timelines associated with it. You're going to submit and within X number of days, it'll be reviewed. And then you can expect to be inspected within this many weeks or something like that. I know you don't have the inspection yet. So that's kind of what I'm looking at in terms of, I would like us to go in with a Fisher-Price children's hammer, since we do these children's things and I don't have children, so I don't know what this means. But the ones that you hit and they squeak, I would rather us go in with a soft enforcement rather than going in with a sledgehammer. Because maybe some people do know that there's a license requirement. Some people may not know that there's a license requirement. I'd like us to try to read the room when we go in and make sure that we aren't going in and I don't want any of us to go and say, or to start receiving emails that said, the city has said this and this is really, this is onerous. I would like us to be partners with the new STRs.
As long as they're compliant with the ordinances that are set forth by the city council to be enforced.
But I just don't
I
want
don't
us to
want that
start
they
throwing.
will want to be in compliance,
Okay,
but
how
not.
long will the demonstration take?
Well, actually, Mayor, so thank you. I just wanted to bring us home and run through what we heard and actually suggest that we can perhaps send out the link to everyone or come back another night. Just being respectful of time and knowing that you all need to be in the dais in about 12 minutes. I think let's not do that tonight.
Okay.
But with what I heard from, let's just make sure we're all on the same page. So it sounds like, yes, regarding the LLC issue, we're going to limit licensing to a natural person and make sure that we get existing licensees into compliance, okay? On the quantity of licenses, what I would propose, at least we bring back for you all to have a more robust discussion from the dais and vote as your conscience dictates, is that we go with the reduced to one, but grandfathering in existing multiples and allow them to keep those if they're in good standing. So I think if we come back with that draft, that allows the conversation to continue, okay? And then it sounds like, yes, we're increasing supporting the increased enforcement. Councilor Griffith, you had a suggestion on the minimum night stay. I think for now, we'll keep it at the 2 in the draft. And again, it can be a discussion for the dais. So if that sounds good to everyone, Nora, does that give you what you need? And I actually think then that we can bring this back, if you want to go to the next slide, on a very pretty quick turnaround, actually, so that this stays fresh in your minds. We can get it right on for first reading on February 3rd. We'll take it to the Planning Commission on the 4th and bring it to second reading on the 17th. And then again, this allows you to have this discussion and this vote while it's all still very fresh in your minds. You didn't do anything tonight that dramatically sends us back to rewrite. You're going to be tweaking the details. So
Excellent.
does that work, Mayor?
It works.
And we'll do the demo another day, Josie. I'm so sorry.
I can put together a video.
Okay. Oh, great.
Oh, that's what I was gonna suggest, yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Perfect. That works for me. Any thoughts, comments, questions from council? All right. All right.
Thank you,
perfect. Thank you all so much.